Politics and the Kennedy School of Government to our second forum of 2002. Last night we were privileged to have Michael Beschloss, who played LBJ tapes for us and then translated what was going on in the process. It was a great evening, and we have equally a great evening tonight in store for each of you who are participating. My name is David Pryor. I'm the director of the Institute of Politics here at the Kennedy School, and once again we welcome each and every one of you. We have a very, very special guest tonight, and he is right here. Richard Neustadt, from 1966 to 1971, was the first director of the Institute of Politics. Richard Neustadt, please take us out. Thank you so much. Those of you who do not know Richard Neustadt have now been introduced to a true icon. As you know, we spend a lot of time in this forum discussing history. In fact, as we've mentioned, we had history with LBJ last night. Sometimes we ponder the future. We include upcoming discussions on both the future of the Democrat and Republican political parties. But tonight we're talking about the most current of current events. In fact, given the President's remarks during last night's State of the Union address, I don't think that our timing could be any better than what we have in store for you this evening. We are joined this evening by two extremely distinguished foreign policy experts. Boy, that's a Freudian slip. Just kick them off, export them off somewhere. Ambassador Ken Edelman on my right, and Professor John Deutsch on my left. Tonight's subject: should Iraq be next? Moderating tonight's timely debate is the one and only Kennedy School's own resident expert, Professor Graham Allison, certainly no stranger, the director of the Kennedy School's Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs, one of the leading analysts on U.S. national security, defense policy, and terrorism, the author of Essence of Decision, Explaining the Cuban Missile Crisis, among many other books and articles. Also has worked very, very close in the Secretary of Defense office. He was awarded the Defense Department's highest civilian award, Defense Medal for Distinguished Public Service. Ladies and gentlemen, my pleasure. At this time, please welcome Professor Graham Allison. Graham.
Thank you very much, David. And I think we have David and Bill White and the forum team to thank for their exquisite sense of timing. I mean, how many people, when planning an event weeks in advance, can make sure that they have President Bush on the night before offering a promo? Okay. Now, how many of you heard or saw the State of the Union message last night? Okay, good. So this is not an ignorant group. There were many hot lines in that speech, but the axis of evil, that's what President Bush last night named Iraq, Iran, and North Korea. Confronting an axis of evil, what should a superpower do? And to quote one more paragraph from President Bush last night, quote, Iraq continues to flaunt its hostility towards America and to support terrorism. The Iraqi regime has plotted to develop anthrax and nerve gas and nuclear weapons for over a decade. This is a regime that has something to hide from the civilized world. By seeking weapons of mass destruction, this and other such regimes pose a grave and growing danger. And then the punchline, the United States of America will not permit the world's most dangerous regimes to threaten us with the world's most destructive weapons. President Bush's warning finds considerable support across the American political spectrum, including in Congress today, where just a month earlier, a group of congressional leaders, including Lieberman and Lott and McCain, said, quote, "For so long as Saddam Hussein is in power in Baghdad, he will seek to acquire weapons of mass destruction and the means to deliver them. We have no doubt that these deadly weapons are intended for use against the U.S. and its allies. Consequently, we believe we must directly confront Saddam sooner rather than later." Close quote. So, on the other hand, many observers have asked, rightly, what about the costs and risks of such advice? What about the likelihood of support by the U.S.'s principal allies, including Britain and France, Russia, China? What about the region, the regional powers, and the bases from which such an effort might be launched, like Saudi Arabia, which is said not from our soil? What about the support for the war against global terrorism if there's no smoking gun that links Saddam to 9/11? Well, the question before the House tonight is, should Iraq be next in the war against terrorism? Potential answers: yes, no, I don't know. Okay? We'll see what our two debaters have to answer. Of course, there's yes, but not until we finish Al-Qaeda, or no, not yet, not next, but the one after that. In any case, if yes, next or next plus one, who should do what, when, with respect to such a military attack? To illuminate this question, which could not be a more timely question for all of us, we're very fortunate tonight to have two of the most thoughtful and serious participants in the American national security process, in my observation, over the last 25 years. On my right here, at least as I'm facing you, is Ken Edelman, Ambassador Kenny Edelman. He served in the Reagan administration as the Director of Arms Control and Disarmament. He's been for a long time and is currently a member of the Department of Defense's Defense Policy Board. In the Clinton administration, people talked about FOBs, Friends of Bills. Since Rumsfeld has become famous now, there's a smaller group, but nonetheless a serious group of people who are FODs. These are Friends of Don, and Kenny is one of the closest. Among other things, he currently runs a enterprise called Movers and Shakespeare's. I did pronounce it right, Shakespeare's, which provides executive training using case studies from Shakespeare's works. And he and his wife gave a version of that here in the forum last fall, which was a very interesting event, which we look forward to having him back to do. On my left, again facing you, is Professor John Deutsch. John is a professor from another college or university in Cambridge, whose name I never quite remember, but it's close by. It's not Simmons, so you'll have to think. John is actually the institute professor at MIT, where he served previously as provost. He's also been chairman of the chemistry department there and is a close friend and colleague and active participant in the work of the Belfer Center here at the school. John has served as director of CIA, as deputy secretary of defense, as undersecretary, and as deputy secretary at the Department of Energy, and has been actively involved in the whole array of national security issues, particularly as they're impacted by developments in science and technology. So we couldn't have a better twosome. They're each going to get 2 minutes to start. Sorry, 10 minutes to start, up to 10 minutes, not more than 10 minutes. Then we're going to come to the audience for discussion and debate. Being acutely conscious that that because of an incident that occurred at, I guess, the press conference, that the World Heavyweight Championship fight between Lennox Lewis and Mike Tyson has actually been judged to be inappropriate for Nevada and is now going to have to move to another state. I encourage our two debaters to please offer their views sharply, but no biting. Okay? So to begin, let me turn to Ken Edelman.
Thank you very much, Graham. That was a nice introduction. That was so much nicer than an introduction I had recently in Indianapolis, where the person got all carried away telling about my time working for Donald Rumsfeld, which was 3 times, once in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and the first time with Dick Cheney when we were in OEO in 1970 and 71, and membership in the Defense Policy Board and knowing exactly what's happening. So he got all riled up, and he said, "So ladies and gentlemen, listen up carefully. For the latest dope from Washington, here's Ken Edelman." Sometimes it doesn't come out right, and sometimes it's a matter of translation. I gave a speech about 6 months ago in Tokyo about security in Northeast Asia, and the wonderful head of the institute there said afterwards that for my remarks and for my service to the country, I deserve much clap. I said, "Thank you very much. We'll hold off on that. Of all the things I need in the world, the much clap is not one of them." But I guess the greatest rhetorical flourish I had was when I was ambassador to the United Nations as Gene Kirkpatrick's deputy at the beginning of the Reagan administration. And one of the things, in my view, one of the few things that the United Nations ever did very well was welcome new countries into it. And so we had this nice ceremony in the UN Security Council, and there was Robert Mugabe, the president then of Zimbabwe, still the president of Zimbabwe, and he was welcomed in, and he said, sitting there in the Security Council, he could not believe when he was fighting the racist regime of Rhodesia that he would be there in the Security Council as president of a new country, Zimbabwe, sitting, as he said, before this awesome organ of ours. So all of us wondered what he was talking about before he explained that he considered the UN Security Council this awesome organ of ours. So from then on, every afternoon, I would open up our door to Gene Kirkpatrick's office, and I said, "Would you like to sit before the awesome organ of ours, or should I fiddle with it?" But we let that go after a while because people overheard us, and they thought there were all kinds of shenanigans. But let me just say that when I appreciate, Graham, what you are doing here at the Forum, and the Forum deserves, in my Japanese friends' words, much clap. I have known John Deutsch for a good number of years, and I have admired John Deutsch enormously over the years, and he had a distinguished career in government that has been underappreciated in my mind. And so I just want to start off and say, in my mind, that John Deutsch really deserves much clap for his service to the country. Let me just say that I probably won't use the original 10 minutes because the first part of my remarks were given by the warm-up act of President Bush last night in the State of the Union. That's the extent, the extremes to which our side will go in preparing to win this debate here at the Harvard Forum, when you have the State of the Union really poised it and really queuing it up so beautifully. My overall thesis is very, very simple. It has 3 parts. Number 1, that we absolutely have to take out the government of Saddam Hussein as quick as possible, as soon as possible. I don't want to go after Iraq as a country. I want to end the regime of Saddam Hussein. It's absolutely essential. Point number 2, it's not that hard to do. And point number 3, it would have enormous repercussions in the region itself that will change the whole dynamics. The first point is we need to get rid of this regime. As the President said, the most dangerous weapons in the world, in the most dastardly hands in the world, is a terrible, terrible combination. And as bad as Al-Qaeda is, and as bad as Osama bin Laden is, they are still a terrorist organization. They are not a terrorist state. Saddam Hussein is in charge of a terrorist state. Being in charge of a terrorist state gives you great advantages. What does it give you? It gives you an enormous mass to do things that a terrorist organization doesn't have. And if you ever look at a book that I recommend highly called Saddam's Bomb Maker by the man who for 20 years was responsible for the nuclear effort, Mr. Hamza, who wrote about his experience, you realize and this collaborates evidence that you can see in the open press, you realize what a massive effort Saddam Hussein has made, not just on biological weapons, not just on chemical weapons, but also on nuclear weapons. And according to Qadir Hamza, that he had 12,000 full-time employees, including 3,000 engineers working just on nuclear weapons, a budget of at least $3 billion a year just on nuclear weapons. The number of total employees, of top-notch employees, was twice as big as the Argonne Labs, the biggest nuclear facility in the United States, right here. He has hundreds of labs around that country. They are, not only does he have the money and the materials and the labs to do it, but he also has the whole diplomatic apparatus. As head of a country, you can use the diplomatic pouch to get everything in and out where you go. You use the diplomatic residence and the offices to hold your meeting to buy illegal equipment. And you have a big operation going. And that big operation is clear with Saddam Hussein. It is to develop weapons of mass destruction as absolute quickly as he can and to use them in the absolute most devastating manner he can against primarily the United States that he feels particularly strongly about. So the idea of someday looking back, like we are going to do reviews now over how the United States could have apprehended Osama bin Laden over the last 8 years, and there are at least 3 times, it seems, like he could have been apprehended, at least that is the evidence that's coming out now, and think to yourself, oh my God, we missed a wonderful opportunity to stop real problems before they became so damaging to the West. I think that any time we delay for getting Saddam Hussein's government, we are risking the possibility of looking back and saying we had the opportunity to take him out and we didn't take that opportunity. We had the opportunity to move the most important thing of our age. Our age is marked right now by the war for civilization, for tolerance, and for freedom. And that war happened earlier in the last 100 years, obviously, with Nazism. Then it happened after that, obviously, with communism. And now it is happening, obviously, with terrorism. This is what this age is about. And unless we address the primary issue, to save civilization, to save freedom, to save our values and tolerance against these threats, I think we are taking a chance on everything we hold dear. I will discuss later on my other 2 points. It's not going to be that hard to take them out. And the whole regional change, the whole dynamics of what is happening in the most difficult region in the world, the Persian Gulf, will change once we do take them out.
Good. A good example, only 8.5 minutes. So we thank you. Professor Deutsch.
Graham, I have to uncharacteristically compliment you for your introduction of Ken Edelman. I mean, Ken Edelman is one of the really leading foreign policy experts in this country. He's a broad-gauged guy. He's a Shakespeare scholar. You didn't mention the fact that he's a world-class tennis player. You also didn't mention the fact that he's also a respected journalist. He is a terrific guy. He has my greatest respect, not quite as much as his wife, Carol, who is even better. But his views really deserve the most serious consideration. And I'm pleased to be here discussing these matters with him. It won't surprise you that he's a great man. I agree with a lot of what he has to say. First of all, it should be the policy of this country to remove Saddam Hussein's regime. No question about that. He is a source of instability in that region that plagued us in 1991. In the matter of his invasion of Kuwait, he remains a source of instability in the region. He seeks weapons of mass destruction. The record is clear, and he continues to do so. He is responsible for the misery and the poverty of the Iraqi people and has been so for a couple of decades. He hates the United States, and he's always willing to assist terrorists to strike at us. For all of these reasons, it should be the policy of this country to remove the regime of Saddam Hussein from power, and we should do so as expeditiously as possible. However, there is a problem. It has to be done right. I'm very pleased that my friend Ken Edelman did not give you some of the more goofy ideas that I've heard on this subject.
Those are to come, John.
One of them is, gee, we've seen how easy it was to manage Afghanistan, and Iraq is almost as easy. We'll just take those dissident groups, the Shias in the south, the Kurds in the north, we'll train them, give them a little equipment and some air support, and they will just rush on to Baghdad. That is a goofy notion and one which has to be understood. The political circumstances of the Middle East and involving yourself in Iraq, which is at the heart of the Arab world, are much more demanding, not only to American military power, but also to our diplomatic and political interests in the region. So I want to start by saying it is goofy to think it's going to be an easy problem. You're dealing right in the middle of the Arab world. You have to make sure that our intervention will lead to a better outcome for long-term U.S. interests than if we do not intervene. You have Kurds in the north, you have Shias in the south, you have Sunnis in the center of this country, and there is by no means one clear group which is the legitimate political authority in that country. So, I claim that before we take military action, certain things must be in place, and they must be in place in a way which is visible to the public, not only in this country, but to our allies and to the world. And I hereby say 4 items should be answered. 4 matters should be clearly in hand before you risk military involvement in that region. First, there must be an identification of a leader to take Saddam Hussein's place, a leader in some sort of a regime. Let me call that leader Thomas Jefferson Hussein. As far as I know, it's not going to be easy to find such a leader, and until you have such a leader, you are going towards ambiguity and darkness in a most serious way. So the first thing is, who is going to be our leader? Around who are we going to build a post-Saddam government in Iraq? Secondly, and most importantly, there has to be some consensus with the involved countries in the region about the nature of Iraq as a country after Saddam Hussein falls. This means Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, to an extent Syria and Iran. Each one of these countries has a remarkable interest in the political future of Iraq after Saddam Hussein, and not speaking to what that future will be means that they are going to be ambiguous about giving us support. And let me say, private assurances from these countries is not enough. If the United States intervenes in Iraq, we must be seen in the Arab world as doing something which is of benefit to the region, of benefit to all of the Middle East, and that can only be done if there is the vocal and public support of some of those countries, and I believe that that, with hard diplomatic work, is available. What is not all right is to say, let's go to Baghdad and then play jump a ball and see who gets the government. You cannot do that. You must have some understanding about what the nature of the political circumstances in the country will be once American troops and its allies reach the capital. You cannot just say, this is up for grabs once we get to Baghdad. Third, we must be clear about the nature and extent of the military force that we are willing to commit in order to get rid of Saddam Hussein. Is it air power and training? Is it air power and training and deployment of ground troops? How long will we stay there, and what will the basing be? Deployment of military forces puts our young men and women at risk, and we must be sure that we have understood the nature of the military deployment, because it is not the case that all military deployments occur with no casualties. So we must be very clear about that. And fourth, we must know what is the economic and social assistance and civil government assistance that you will give Iraq after the fall of the Saddam Hussein government. You must have agreement on the economic and social programs that will be in place so that there is some prospect that the subsequent regime after Saddam Hussein will indeed be a force of political stability in the region and will indeed not lead to more insecurity. My main point is the following. The absolute essential measures to assure that long-term U.S. interests are actually achieved by collapsing Saddam Hussein are not yet in place. It requires some understanding of a leader for a post-Saddam government. It requires some public consensus of what the nature is of the political system in Iraq after the fall of Saddam Hussein. It involves some understanding of the range of military implementation that you're going to use to achieve the fall of Saddam Hussein, and it necessarily, if we're responsible, requires an understanding of economic and social assistance which occurs after that time. When those items are in place, when those four questions can be answered publicly by the President of the United States, then I believe it will be time for us to take those military steps required to reach a better government in Iraq, which will serve the interests of peace, of prosperity, and democratic participation in Iraq and throughout that region. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much, John. Let me just make sure that we got this issue joined here, because I can't...
We got it joined. You don't have to worry about that.
You say, your second point is, this is not that hard. So two questions to you briefly. One, if it was not that hard, in 1991, we quit at the end of Desert Storm. President Bush remained president for a few years. Then Clinton was president for a while. And President Bush Jr. was president and was not doing anything. So are the tests that John Deutsch sets easy and they just didn't identify him, or has he got the wrong tests, or why is it not that hard?
Good. I was hoping you'd ask that. Let me just say that, John, you didn't disappoint me at all. I thought you were starting out so lovey-dovey and agreeing with everything I said. I was worried, where's the debate here? But you lived up to your billing as setting up real differences. It is not that hard taking out Saddam Hussein. And why do I say this? Taking a sheet from Honorable Deutsch right there. There are four basic reasons. Number one is, it wasn't that hard the first time. Desert Storm was a relatively easy military operation. The ground war was 100 hours. The casualties of the United States were less than 2%, the casualties of Iraq. And what I remember about the Iraq ground forces, most of all, are, hundreds, if not thousands, of soldiers who were trying to give up to Italian film crews. So, and the Italian film crews really didn't know what to do with all of these surrenders at their hand. The main military function was to try to find something to do with all the surrendering of the Iraqi soldiers. Point number 2, Iraq has gotten much weaker since the Gulf War. The Iraqi army is less than 1/3 the strength that it was at the time of the Gulf War. The Iraqi Air Force was never much. It's less than half than it was. The Iraqis over the last 10 years have gotten very few spare parts. They've gotten very few operational capability and practice. And they are hurting, and it's a much, much smaller and weaker force than it was. Much weaker. Point number 3, we have gotten enormously stronger since the Gulf War. And it was amazing on the amount of damage that the air power did in the Gulf War before. And the fact is that 90% of the bombs against Iraq in that amazing conflict were dumb bombs, right? In Afghanistan, some 90% of the bombs were smart bombs. Tremendous increase in capabilities that we've had since the Gulf War. America's much, much stronger. We have the Daisy Cutters now that we didn't have then. We have the Global Hawk now with the Hellfire missile we didn't have then. We have enormous capabilities that we never had right then. And I would say also that a gigantic difference is this time we are playing for keeps. This time we are playing for keeps. And when I say playing for keeps, what I mean, to get rid of the regime of Saddam Hussein. Last time the objective was to get Iraq out of Kuwait. And because of coalition politics, the kind of thing Brother Deutsch tells us we have to be very careful about, which I don't think we have to be careful about at all, because of coalition politics, we had to go and, just do Kuwait and stop after that, not getting rid of Saddam Hussein at that time. It could have been a mistake. It would have been more difficult in that situation. But today we're playing for keeps. What do I mean by that? We are defending civilization. We are defending America. We are far more serious and see this as a far greater problem than it was before. And if we announce right from the start that our goal is to get rid of Saddam Hussein, it is not to do any damage to the Iraqi people, the Iraqi country, to get rid of this regime, I have no doubt that the number of surrenders to Italian film crews will go up enormously. I see no evidence at all that any of these guys want to sacrifice their lives to somebody who has used gas against his own people and has had enormous misery over the years. Real quickly, Graham, on the 4 points that Brother Deutsch raises, let me just say I am squarely in the goofy camp that you decried, John. I don't want to disappoint you at all. I am squarely the goofy camp. Number 1, who is going to be the leader that takes over for Saddam Hussein? We have to identify him, put him up there, and know it. All 4 of your criteria, I think, are impossible to fulfill. And if you say these are the criteria that a president needs before going in, it's the old State Department trick and diplomatic trick of setting the bar so high no one can ever achieve them. Number 1, you don't know who's going to be there. If there's a choice between Saddam Hussein and option B, I'm for option B. Okay? No one could be worse. No one could be worse. And point number 2 is even somebody worse has to take years to get worse than Saddam Hussein. Their first years are going to be sniffing each other in the leadership, and they are going to be trying to consolidate their power. And the way these dictatorships, if it comes to that, the way these dictatorships go, and they are going to, be involved in domestic politics. But, people like Bernard Lewis and others are great confidence that there could be a democratic regime there. Point number 2, is there a consensus among neighboring countries? Never. There's never a consensus on anything in that part of the region. What could we do for bases? I think Turkey will go along as we are against splitting up Iraq, and I am against splitting up Iraq. I think Kuwait obviously will go along. I think some other countries could or could not. I'm not very disturbed by it, John, much at all. Number three, the military support we need. I don't think it would be enormous military support. I think we can do enormous damage with air power. We will have to do some, obviously, with ground troops. We will have to do some with the kind of, partners that we've had before, the special forces, that. It will be Afghanistan, but Afghanistan with more ground troops than we had in Afghanistan, for sure. Nothing like 540,000 that we didn't need the first time around, but nothing like that this time around. If you're telling me, Ken, there's going to be casualties, I say, John, you're absolutely right. There's going to be casualties. And that is part of the price we have to pay for this or any other war. And I think the American people realize that as sad as it is, as much pain as it causes individuals, that's eventually what you have to do is fight for our values. Last point, the economic and civil assistance to post-Iraq. Come on, this is a very wealthy country. This is a country that has one of the great, oil reserves in the world. This is a country that has one of the most distinguished histories to it. My experience is they're one of the most wonderful and intelligent group of both intellectuals and people in that part of the region, in that region of the world. Anyway, the Iraqi people have been successful everywhere, everywhere. So I have no idea that there has to be a new Marshall Plan that everybody has to get set for Iraq. Iraq is a wonderful country as long as it doesn't have somebody like Saddam Hussein.
Well, there are moments when I really envy Ken Edelman. And one of them is that apparently he really spends a lot of time with Italian film crews. I think that's terrific. In the Clinton administration, I was a member of the Clinton administration, and I got to tell you two things. One is I always found there interesting there was a State Department guys who would talk cavalierly about committing military force, how easy it was, how everything would work out terrific. And all the time, the Defense Department guys would sit there and say, hey, you got to be careful, because the problem is not getting to Baghdad. The problem is getting out of Baghdad. The problem and the reason that President Bush Sr. and Colin Powell did not go to Baghdad was largely because there was no credible understanding about how to remove the United States and its allies from Baghdad with a political situation that is better than what was there before. Now, we do not differ on the danger and the importance of getting rid of Saddam Hussein. But let me say to you that it is not clear that everybody would choose option B so quickly. In fact, many of the countries on which we must rely in order to be successful militarily, for example, Turkey, is going to have grave difficulties about pulling option B if they don't have some political understanding about what the nature is of the Kurdish participation in the future countries. So I'm sorry. There's nobody here who treasures and admires military power of the United States more than I do. The question is, how do you get a politically better outcome? Now, another thing I'll say on behalf of the Bush administration in 1991, and that is they didn't go to Baghdad when they were in Basra for the very good reason that any sensible person would say this guy's going to get knocked off. He's going to topple. There was a very good reason in 91 to think he wouldn't survive. Now, in fact, he has survived. And militarily, he is weaker. Politically, I'm not sure he's weaker. In fact, I think politically he's stronger in the region. So my problem as a responsible, not goofy, responsible American policy person is, how do I know that the political stability in the region will be better after we've done this job? Now you say it doesn't matter who's going to be there. It does matter. You don't have to, you're not going to get Thomas Jefferson. I know you're not going to get Thomas Jefferson. And I guess now reading these new books we're not sure okay. The fact of the matter is you have to think about the central regime. This is not like Afghanistan, which really, there is not that kind of centrality to its position in the region, into a region which is already of very perilous importance to the United States. You, sir, have not answered the difficult political questions. You say, let the bombs do it. And I say there are difficult political questions that have to be better understood than I believe they're understood now, and they should be publicly understood.
Let me give you 1 minute and 1 minute, and then we're going to come to the audience. Let me tell the audience there are 4 microphones, 2 here on the floor and 2 in the lodges, and you should please line up. But Ken, yeah.
If you set up the criteria of who is going to follow Saddam Hussein, you're setting up a criteria that you cannot fulfill. So you might as well be more honest and just say you are against ever going after him. We did not know who was going to follow Hitler in Germany when we went after Germany. We did not know who was going to follow in Japan. We did not go into those wars saying this is our hero to follow these guys. We knew that the system had to be better on something like that. Point number 2, you cannot tell me, John, that the countries in the region are ever going to agree with our decision to knock out Saddam Hussein vocally. I think we can get cooperation from Turkey. I think once we do it, every single country in that region will applaud us and say that was far better future than it ever was in the past. There is no support, as we saw in 1991. There is no support for Saddam Hussein.
Now, Ken, let me say 2 things to you that I want to make absolutely clear. You are wrong to say that there is no circumstances under which I would go for military intervention.
Well, under your criteria, you can't meet your criteria.
No, I'm sorry, sir. I believe you can, and I don't need 100% certainty in each aspect. But I want to tell you, I do think that there are certain fundamental issues that have to be clearer than they are today. I have some idea about the character of that government. Maybe not a precise name, but some character. Is it going to be a split-up country? Or are you going to have a coalition government between Sunni, Kurds, and Shias? Never happened in world history. And you just have to know some of these things. You cannot go into these things absolutely without any. But I believe it's possible. I also believe that you can get these countries to sign on for it. I believe you can get Turkey. I believe you can get Saudi Arabia. I believe you can get Jordan. I believe you can even get Syria to sign on to some view about what the character of Iraq should be. And until you do that, you're not going to find King Fahd. You're not going to find the Turkish government willing to let you use any basis. You must have some idea of what the nature of the government is going to be in Iraq after Saddam. And nobody tells me what it is.
I'll tell you right now what it is, John. It is going to be a unified government. Okay, so we are not going to split the country in 3. I am not going to recommend that the United States of America scrounge around to try to get the support of Syria on anything we do. Here's a country, a little miserable country that has supported terrorism. No, seriously, it has supported terrorism, one of the most vile regimes in the world, and you're telling me I have to scrape and bow to get Syria's support for what I want to do to protect civilization.
I regret it. I regret it.
You should really regret it.
I should have tried to make a practical point.
Okay, but that's what's wrong. That's what's wrong with your whole approach. You have the United States of America depending on what Syria wants to do for us, and I am for going out and doing what is best for us and what is best clearly for that region, regardless of the view of Damascus. Let me last say, I think that it is clear that almost no matter what you do, as long as you are absolutely right, John, as long as you are sure that there's going to be a territorial integrity for Iraq, that I think Turkey will go along with you. I think that Kuwait will go along with you. I doubt whether the Saudis will ever vocally, publicly go along with you. But to tell you the truth, I'm not that interested in the Saudi government views.
You should be concerned about what Arab public opinion is in the long run.
Why?
About our political...
Why, John? Why? Every single prediction about the Arab Street for the last 5 years has been wrong, John. Okay? Every time, the beginning of the Afghan campaign, it was the Arab Street was going to do this, and the Arab Street was going to do this. And you know what happened, John? We won that war, and the Arab Street said, holy cow, This is a different United States of America. They respected our power instead of going around soliciting their views endlessly on the most radical groups that are funded by the governments over there, especially Egypt and Saudi Arabia, that are rent a crowd, rent a protest, that go out and because they are fed this garbage of hatred towards the West, hatred toward Jews, hatred towards Israel. They're fed all that, and then they create a little problem, and it gets on TV, and everybody says, holy cow, we can't do anything because of this Arab street. You win a war, John, and they shut up real quickly.
Okay, I think I was worried that we were going to have no differences of opinion. I think that I want to get the audience into it. Let me tell you the ground rules. Identify yourself and your association with the school. State your question or point briefly. Then we'll have brief comments from the two. And then after we've done comments there, we'll come back to wrap up for the two of you. Bob?
Thank you, sir. I'm Bob Brannon, U.S. Navy captain and a National Security Fellow here at the Kennedy School. My question is indeed very short. The Iraqi desert is a big place. Saddam is a relatively small man. What happens if we attack the government of Saddam Hussein and miss? How much blood, how much treasure, for how long?
Not much blood and not much treasure, and it'll be relatively short. Why do I say that? Why do I say that? I am not going, and I would never go and target, just him alone. You have to go for the main instruments of power. And those main instruments of power are quite clear. Some 38 presidential palaces, whatever they are, the military headquarters, the intelligence headquarters, the installations that you have around the country, the Republican Guard, all that. The minute you start launching all that, you tell anybody, you are getting rid of this regime. You are not going after the country. You are not going after its assets in any way. You're not going after bridges. If you guys want to give up your lives fighting for this guy, go ahead, because we're going to win this war, and this guy's going to be gone. And I'll tell you something. Not many people will want to do it. The same thing will happen as happened in the beginning of Desert Storm, where people took to the roofs on Baghdad, cheering when the incoming missiles came in and the bombs came through American stealth aircraft. Why? Because they thought we were going to go in and get this guy. And you're going to find more people on the roofs cheering us, because this time we're playing for keeps.
Well, Captain, I hope he's right. I have had some experience in worrying about target selection in Iraq. I've had some experience about worrying about target selection in other countries as well. I always find that the intelligence, while oftentimes superb, isn't always 100% accurate. I worry about the fact that he might have, well, if not a Scud, some other kind of delivery system which will put a chemical round into Tel Aviv, making this a much different situation. I worry about where our aircraft carriers will be, about where our ships will be, how far up you're going to take them in the Gulf. I worry about what airfields you're going to have. It is, no question about it, a very possible. We are more powerful than we were in '91. We have more high-tech weaponry. But let me tell you something, it isn't a piece of cake. And under the circumstances, the jump ball circumstances that he's putting in here, we're going to be in that country for a long time. And you're going to find people there worrying about guerrilla warfare, depending upon the way the country goes. And you may find Arab public opinion not being quite so docile as he condescendingly has it be. So it may be quite an adventure. I say take the time to put the political circumstances in place so you minimize those risks.
Thanks, Sadie.
Let me just make a footnote question, Ken, just for a brief one. Is finding Saddam easier or harder than finding bin Laden?
Oh, it's just as difficult. And I would not say that.
And have
but
we
let me
found
tell
bin
you,
Laden?
no, but let me tell you that, no, Graham, it's not a right question. I hate to take on the moderator. I got enough hand on my hands.
I just tried for clarification.
You know, there was that incident
You get George Bush, I get Graham. It seems fair.
No, it was that. incident, remember that
in trouble.
in 1863, there was an incident where the British took a bunch of American soldiers, Union soldiers, and Seward came rushing into Lincoln's, "We got to do something," and Lincoln just looked up from his desk. He says, "One war at a time." Okay, that's what I feel about on this panel right now. But I would say that going after the person of Osama bin Laden is extremely, extremely tough. Getting a regime like the regime of Saddam Hussein, I don't think is very tough at all. Why? Because I am not talking about killing him or having him dead. I am talking about removing his power from the other apparatus. And how do you do that? You do that for a variety of ways. These guys kick him out. They don't no longer follow the directions. He no longer can talk to anybody. He no longer has an apparatus. It's very simple.
Good.
Very
So
simple.
you're doing regime rather than person.
Absolutely.
Here.
Thank you. My name is Josh. I'm a junior. Professor Deutsch, you mentioned that we shouldn't pass up the opportunity to get Iraq, and of course we've done that once before. So my question is about that. My sense is that you both think that it was a mistake to have passed up the opportunity a decade ago, but please correct me if I'm wrong about that. But if you do think it was a mistake to have passed up the opportunity with the Gulf War to finish it off, what do you think we should have done then? And do you think that your ideas, even if they sound great in retrospect, do you think they would have worked at the time, given the political atmosphere that caused us to pull out then when we did? And do you think the atmosphere has now changed to make it possible to finish off the job, but we couldn't do that?
Let me be very clear on this. I think the decision was taken by President Bush Sr., by Secretary Cheney, by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Colin Powell, to pull back when the U.S. Offensive got to Basra was exactly the right decision to make at that time. And I've tried to indicate two reasons. There are more, but there are really two. The first one is that there was not the political basis with the alliance about what to do when you got to Baghdad. And there was at that time, I think, a very, very strong expectation that some lieutenant general would top him off and you would get option B that my colleague Ken Edelman is proposing. So I think that decision was exactly right at the time. And I think anybody who has spoken to President Bush, to Cheney, or to Colin Powell would reach the same conclusion. We did the right thing. The question is, what do you do today? And he is militarily weaker today, but you still have the same problem about what do you do, what happens when you get to Baghdad? Do you play jump ball, or do you have some sense of what your political strategy is going to be for dealing with that region?
Okay, let me move us quickly because we got lots of people up and short questions and short answers, and we're here in the lodge on the left. Yes.
Hi, my name is Eric. I'm a junior at the college. You were talking about how this time is different. We're going to be playing for keeps. And in light of the discussion of chemical and nuclear weapons, I'm wondering if, since this time our mission is to take him out, and there's no question that we're coming for him, do you think that's going to change this conflict from the Gulf War, and that this time he might be more willing to use everything he's got, whatever he has, throw it at our troops, at Israel? What do you think of that?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
And so therefore you anticipate chemical and biological weapons attacks?
No, I
troops or not?
think that he will be tempted, just as the speaker said, to throw everything he has at us. There are various things you can say about it. Number one is that's a very good reason to do it sooner rather than later before he builds up more. Number two, yeah, it's a very good reason to have the Arrow program of Israel and PAC-3, Patriot modernization, in place right there. It is also something that you have to realize when you first target, go in there. And lastly, you have to publicly announce at the beginning of the war, any Iraqi who has anything to do with weapons of mass destruction will be apprehended and punished in the most severe way after the war is done. So if they are going to cooperate from the ground level up in weapons of mass destruction, they will personally be held responsible. And the treatment of al-Qaeda in Guantanamo Bay will look like the four-star Four Seasons, if I get any way, on people that handle weapons of mass destruction for him.
You see, the point that you have admitted here, that it is, after all, a risk. It is a risk that they will use chemical or biological weapons. It sort of belies the major point that this is going to be militarily easy.
No.
It could be militarily very terrible indeed.
No, it's not going to be very terrible,
Chemical
John.
and biological weapons are used, that could happen. I'm not sure delivered by missiles, they can be delivered by other things. You will be facing a situation militarily and humanly that means at least that this is not a, kind of easy, military exercise of your high-tech weaponry. You've suddenly got a big catastrophe in your hands, so you better minimize as much as possible those risks.
Right.
And you haven't told me how we're going to do it.
Right. Let me tell you how you're going to do it. I think you're absolutely right in saying that you have to minimize them. Want to be very clear, especially to this audience, that I am not saying that this is risk-free. There are going to be risks and there are going to be casualties. I believe that if Saddam Hussein has a quantity of chemical weapons, biological weapons, and nuclear weapons, that he is the type of person to use them against the United States as soon as he can, whether there's war or not. And why do I really fear something coming from Baghdad to New York City or Boston? No. I fear far more clandestine and far more worrisome. He has no reason to use these weapons of mass destruction himself. He has every reason in the world to hand them off to one of these international terrorist groups where we cannot trace that kind of decision.
On this point, we agree 100%.
And I'm telling you, and I would believe that the main thing you can do for weapons of mass destruction is hit Saddam sooner rather than later, because every day that we wait, he is building up his arsenal. And every day, John, that you go through your 4 points, like an academic seminar or something, and how are we doing on each of these 4, and in 10 years' time, you're doing okay on 3B,
Okay. Let's go up to the...
You just are going to be there and face a worse situation.
In the loge on the right.
Yes, sir. My name is Bill. I'm a first-year public policy student here at the Kennedy School. My question is, we've gone into Afghanistan. I've heard rumors that we're planning on going into Somalia. We're discussing going into Iraq. At what point does this stop if we do all this? Do we say, okay, North Korea doesn't like us, we're going to go in there. Iran, President Bush mentioned it last night, we're going to go in there. The southern Philippines with all the incidents going on there, we're going to go in there. Do we do this? Do we not do this? And does this lead to a chain reaction in which we set this precedent? We're going to keep going into places where people don't like us. Is this good? Is this bad? Do you agree with that? Or should we stop somewhere, or what?
Oh, it's quite clear to me that we should go wherever we can to wipe out the international terrorist network. And what you're talking about in Somalia is not a regime change or anything like that. They really haven't had a regime for a long time. You're talking about individual camps. And you're talking about the Philippines, helping the Philippines government. You're talking about individual camps. And the government wants us to help in those kind of situations, and we can identify al-Qaeda camps and training areas. Fine, I think we should do that. It's not to say that we're going in there because we found it on the map yesterday, because we don't like the regime, because we don't like the president. We're going there because there's a organization fueled by Saddam Hussein and others who are out to destroy civilization as we know it. And in order to protect our freedom and our tolerance and our civilization, we have to go where the enemy is. That is the main homeland protection we can go, is to get these terrorist camps and these governments and demolish them. So, it's quite clear.
Let me just say,
Your bags are packed and you're ready to go.
let me just say that the point which has been missed is the point which Mr. Lincoln shared with us, which is let's fight one war at a time. Now, of course, we're good enough we could fight 2. We'll forget about the Kosovo and the Bosnia deployments. But I must say that I have a certain sympathy with the question which says, how many of these do I take on at the same time, or what order do I take them on in? Because Iran is a problem, North Korea is a problem, Libya is a problem. There are many, many problems out there. Philippines has elements which are problems. So you do have to think about how do you array your political and military strength to take on 1 or 2 fights at a time. I can't do them all, and I think it's a good question.
Okay, let's move quickly to this gentleman. Yep.
I would like to ask the following.
Please identify yourself to start.
My name is Herman Soot. I'm at the medical school, and I've heard reference to evil and how we're going to protect civilization and all of those noble things. And I am personally astounded that in this whole discussion, there's been no reference to any system of international law. It appears to me, sir, that you would undertake to destroy whatever you think the United States judges to be inimical to its interests. And international law is of zero concern.
Sorry, I assume that question was directed at John.
It was not.
Well, I'm perfectly happy. I'm perfectly happy to make a remark on that, and that is that I do think that we have to respect international law, but we must begin by a very clear understanding of what our long-term national interest is. You have to begin there. And he and I haven't even gotten past that point. He thinks you could just do this easily. And it is only after that that you, in my mind, that you have to consider the best way to conform our national interest with the international community. But I do believe that being clear about our own national interest, which is what we're really talking about here tonight, without denigrating the rule of international law, is an important one. And on that, I believe he and I agree. Because if you don't know what you think your own country can do, it's hard to make progress in an international arena. So I don't think we've been quite, we've just focused on a prior question, if you like, sir. And with respect, I think we're probably together on that one.
And let me come to John's defense on your attack on international law on this. I guess I couldn't disagree with you more, sir. The fact is that the UN Security Council passed a resolution, I believe it was unanimous, right after September 11th, said that there is an international terrorist war against civilization, and countries supported that entirely. NATO supported for the first time ever a resolution saying an attack on one was an attack on all, and what happened on September 11th was an attack on the NATO alliance. There's no question in international law that self-defense has been enshrined in the UN Charter. I was an ambassador to the UN for 2.5 years. I dealt with international law every day of my life. That's what the government paid me to do. And we were very attentive to international law. I just don't see why going after a regime that is totally lawless by every UN resolution about inspection of weapons of mass destruction, gassed his own people, gassed the Iranian people to the tune of 1 million deaths, wanted to incorporate another country, Kuwait, and has done the most dastardly thing in the world. Why going after a regime like that is against international law.
Could you just enumerate cross-border?
I apologize, but we could end up with a debate on this subject. It's not adequate, but it's a topic in itself. Let me go to a student from Iraq.
My name is Ali Sindi. I am a mid-career MPA student at Kennedy School. I am from Kurdistan, the Iraqi part, and actually what a bit disappointed me, which I hope will be clarified later on, was that this big concern of the in the U.S. policy these days about when it comes to Iraq and to what kind of interference or intervention would happen, that all the countries, every Turkish citizen is taken in consideration, every Arab citizen is taken in consideration, but nobody is saying what the Iraqis wants, what the Iraqi citizen wants. I am from Kurdistan. I am a Kurd. For the last 10 years, we had been protected in this no-fly zone. The people, the generation which is living now in Kurdistan, although we had some bad times, some internal conflicts, nowadays everything is much better than before. Those children who were 5 years old in 1990, they are now 15 years old, and they know nothing about the rest of Iraq. They know only about Kurdistan. If a Kurd, although all the Kurdish political parties or leadership nobody is asking for an independence, for example, but if you go to the level of ordinary citizens, nobody is against that. Why the opinion of 4 million of population should be neglected because the Turks today, or Turkey, is against that? So I understand that this goes with the national interest of U.S. with Turkey, having Turkey as a NATO member, etc. But you are saying that you are planning for the future of Iraq. Future of Iraq is inside Iraq, and is the people of Iraq who should decide how they want to live.
Good. So the question is, should the people of Iraq's views count in this discussion?
Yeah.
My view is, of course, they should, and what the approach I'm trying to take, I believe, is more responsive to the people of Iraq and the neighboring countries than the, let's play jump ball in Baghdad approach. But let me just say, and the question of a Kurdish state may be what you want to put on the table.
Yes.
If you say, let's put on the table the question of the Kurdish state, in the course of resolving this question, you're really going to have to deal with Kurdish lands that are in Syria, Kurdish lands that are in Turkey, Kurdish lands that are in Iran. And you will not be able to say, let us build a Kurdish state out of what is in Iraq alone with any great sense. Now, it is perfectly just, it is perfectly proper to raise the issue, what about the question of a Kurdish state? But then you raise the issue, which I was trying to address, about what do these countries think about this? And if you're going to have as your objective to get rid of Saddam, you are going to have to understand a little bit how you're going to manage this Kurdish question. You're not going to be able to leave it till later on. So I'm actually saying, let's think about the character of that government. Are you really going to let the Kurdish part of Iraq and Syria and Iran and Turkey come together in a more or less semi-autonomous region? That's a very different outcome. Let me also say that it's not my experience that the KDP and the PUK or the PKK actually get along so well at all. So you have quite a problem there just to sort out the Kurdish problem. And let me tell you, the Shias in the south are as complex. So you're going to have to put this all together to come out with a plan B, which makes some stable sense for the region. But I personally think that the issue of Kurdish national sovereignty is one which inevitably comes up, and if you start this with the Kurds being armed and heading south, you're going to have quite a political mess in your hands.
Okay, we're not going to resolve the future of the Kurds in Kurdistan, but can I move on, or do you want to make a quick comment?
I just wanted to say that Brother Deutsch is either even slippier than I thought. The fact is,
Wait a minute. You can either call me academic or you can call me slippery. You can't call
We
me
got
both.
goofy, academic, and slippery.
he's a slippery academic, I'll tell you. John, you just can't have it both ways. John, you can't have it both ways. You can't say we have to work out exactly who's going to take over the government of Iraq, and number two, we're going to leave it to the Iraqi people. We have no great plebiscite right now under Saddam Hussein on what the Iraqi people want to do. So don't give me the idea that let's not replace Hitler till we find out who's going to be in the Bundestag after Hitler goes. We're not going to replace Tojo in Japan till we find out what that whole government is going to be. That is a recipe, John, for inaction forever. This man is absolutely right. The people of Iraq should understand and should have some voice, the voice, in choosing the future leadership of Iraq without academic Deutsch telling them who to choose.
Okay, the gentleman in the loge here, please.
Thank you. My name is Moshe Segebre, and I'm from the business school. What I hear Professor Deutsch say is going to be hard, and on the other side, the ambassador says it's going to be relatively easy. The question would be, do you believe that this administration is indeed going after Iraq, and if so, when? And the last one following up would be with or without a coalition.
Well, my view is you've mischaracterized me. I say with the proper preparation, it'll be easy. And without any preparation, it's going to be likely high risk of being a disaster. So all I'm asking for is let's do the hard work necessary rather than just saying it's going to be a piece of cake. So I think with the political work, and I think it's possible to do, I think it's possible to get some sense of what the political future of Iraq is going to be among those the leaders of that part of the world, to make a start to get rid of this guy, which I think has to be done. I think the fact that they're looking for weapons of mass destruction is a threat to everybody. So my point is, and it's a modest one compared to his, when he says it's going to be easy, much more difficult to make. I wish I could make it as eloquently as others.
Do you want to
And that is, make the preparations before you do it. Do the political hard work before you do it.
You want a quick point on this or no?
No.
Okay, we're going here.
My name is Ajax Mercedes from the Kennedy School of Government. I am asking a question for the ambassador, and the option B, prefer to, or any option prefer to Saddam Hussein. When the Afghanistan people were fighting against Russians, the United States supporting bin Laden. Years after that, September 11th, when Iran and Iraq were in war, and in the times of the Ayatollah Khomeini, the United States supported Saddam Hussein because it was in the best national interest in that time, because the big enemy was Iran and the Iran Revolution. My question is, aren't those lessons of history important to be taken into account before getting into whatever instead of Saddam Hussein?
Yes.
And do they lead you to any different conclusion? No.
I guess the conclusion that American support was quite essential for getting the Soviet Union out of Afghanistan. I guess my conclusion is that support was absolutely right to do to get the Soviet Union out of Afghanistan. I think that once the Soviet Union got out of Afghanistan, it was almost the end of the Soviet Empire, which was a godsend by all accounts. One of the most momentous things that happened last century. I remember very well sitting with President Reagan in Geneva in 1985, in the first summit in 7 years, in November 14th, 1985, and having the president come back in the room and says, I think that Gorbachev is really talking about something new on Afghanistan. And all of us really hardliners, I've modified myself since then. I've become much softer, John, since those days. But us hardliners then would go and say, I cannot believe that the Russians were going out of Afghanistan. They went out of Afghanistan in large part because of the assistance. It was the start of the real change in the Soviet Union, the start of the end, thank God, of the Soviet Union on that. So I think that was worth every dime, if you ask me. On Saddam Hussein and the Iran-Iraq war, I know this is going to sound terrible, but the fact is that war between two of the worst countries in the world, I'm sad to see any war happen, but if any war had to happen, that was the best one to happen. It really kept him busy for a long time. It kept him, I think that the deaths were very tragic. And the fact is, however, after that time, both of them caused enormous, enormous problems. So I wish they would never have gotten into war. And the fact is that obviously at that time, right after Khomeini took over, we thought Iran was a big threat, and it still is a big threat, but Saddam Hussein is the bigger threat today.
Okay, gentleman here.
Yes, the question to the ambassador, since you invoked rhetoric of values, civilization, freedom, democracy, there we heard instrumental reason. From you, we kind of moral reason. Would you commit yourself then to idea that democracy, self-determination, not appointing somebody for Iraq? Would it occur in your mind that the Iraqi people can debate the public reason and can choose their parliament and that have their own sovereignty as all other nations have? Or do you think that democracy is suitable only for some nations and not for others? This is one. Second, no, because
question, a customer,
right.
Because it wasn't clear. Second, would the U.S. commit itself not use the UN resolution as a cover, but commit in advance, not post factum, to cover its action. You would state here and now that we would do just only within the mandate that the UN would decide for us. This is the question.
Yeah. Let me just say that I totally agree with your first, the direction of your first comment. That is what Honorable Deutsch calls, jump a ball. And because his first of the 4 criteria was have a leader clearly in mind to take Saddam Hussein's place.
Not in mind, not in your mind, in the mind of the Iraqi people.
I absolutely agree with that. I would set up
without intervention.
Right. I would set up a system so that there could be a democratic country and a democratic government in Iraq. That would be absolutely the ideal situation. And I think if you got that, you would get on to what I started to say at the beginning of my remarks. You would have a transformation in that region that would be magnificent. We would have to be far less solicitous to the Saudi regime than we are today. We could have a model of a prosperous and progressive regime in the Gulf, which needs a progressive regime and a model regime for all of us because of the tremendous difficulties they have on the economic front, on the military front, and every front, according to Bernard Lewis and every other scholar, that Islam has been on the slide and feeling it so much over the years. But a Saddam Hussein gone Iraq could be exactly what you envision, change the whole dynamics of the region in a way that would be terribly, terribly exciting. So besides just getting rid of that problem threatening us, our relationship could change fundamentally with the Saudis, which I would welcome very much. Our relationship could change fundamentally with Egypt and with the Arab countries in general, because I think Iraq could lead the way to a prosperous, progressive, modernizing, and fairly wealthy Arab state.
Okay.
May I say a word about this, because you give me an opportunity to clarify a point that I make. When I say that it's so important to have a leader in some coalition government, it is not forever. It is not to preclude the possibility of democratic elections. But the day that Saddam Hussein mysteriously goes away, you're going to have the need for an infrastructure, an administration, and something which keeps the peace. Let me suggest to you that if you said in the case of Bosnia, Croatia, and Serbia, all that was necessary to do was just to walk in there and let there be free elections, you wouldn't have had an answer. You require a lot more in terms of maintaining peace for a while under some kind of responsible government before the possibility of broad-scale elections, I believe, occurs in that country. You have Republican Guard divisions that have to be taken care of and worried about. There are a lot of things that have to be done, and you must have some idea about the country you're talking about and in what way you're going to allow the political process to evolve.
Okay, we have 6 minutes remaining, so quick answers and quick questions and quick answers. Please.
Thank you. My name is Achilles Alvar. I'm mid-career here at the Kennedy. I have a question for Dr. Deutsch. Is it possible to solve the Iraqi problem and have any kind of stability in the region without reaching some sort of accommodation, not friendship, not alliance, accommodation between the United States and the Islamic Republic of Iran?
And of Iran?
Yeah, Iran.
Well, that's a very good question. And frankly, I think that's a very astute question. I think that the United States policy would be much better off if we differentiated more between Iran and Iraq, because I do, here again, think that there are very, very different circumstances. So without applauding the Iranian regime, without neglecting the fact that they also have a lot of bad conduct in front of them, I think that U.S. policy would be much, much better advised if we differentiated more between Iraq and Iran, and indeed took whatever steps were reasonable to live with Iran. I might say that many of our allies would welcome that as well, but I think it's an astute question. How to manage it is difficult.
I would come at the opposite way. I think the least we can do with the Iranian government today, the better off. I am for a revolution in Iran, because Iran, interestingly enough, has a very totalitarian government and from what I take it and what seems amazing to me, but clear, is a tremendous support from the Iranian people that is pro-American and pro-Western. And I have been stunned over the last year by the protests in the street of an ever-mounting kind that wants to get rid of the Iranian government. It's very interesting. Both Iran and Iraq have governments in them that are very hostile to the United States and people in them that are very pro-American. It's interesting that Egypt and Saudi Arabia have governments that tend to be favorable towards the United States and people who seem to be very hostile toward the United States. And two Middle East countries, Turkey and Israel, have both governments and people who are friendly to the United States.
Okay. Here we go.
Okay. My name is Dan Craig. I'm a sophomore here in the college. Leaving aside the question of whether or not we could accomplish this feat militarily, if we do go after Iraq today, don't we sort of risk undercutting support for Vladimir Putin, especially in light of our recent abrogation of the ABM treaty? And wouldn't that have bad consequences?
No, we were going to debate the ABM treaty when we first suggested this, and everybody was quite hysterical about how the Russian reaction was. The Russian reaction was a collective yawn. So let's not spook ourselves into thinking, oh my God, if we do something like this, it is going to absolutely destroy the relations with Russia. I've been through so many of those over the years, as I'm sure John has, that if we put missiles into Europe, it'll destroy our relations with Russia. If we take the missiles out of Europe, it'll destroy, I mean, everything is going to destroy our relations. What the Russians are real interested in, to be very frank with you, they'd like to get paid on the $8 billion that Iraq owes Russia. And you know what I think about that? I think it's a fine idea. They should get paid by a follow-on government to Saddam Hussein. And once this new government takes place, I am happy, and I'm happy to announce it ahead of time, that some of the money of the oil money should go into escrow to pay the Russian bills. It's fine with me.
Okay. The lady here.
To follow up, I'm a Kennedy School student. To follow up on the gentleman from Harvard Medical School's question, on what grounds are both of you racing into Iraq on? And my understanding of foreign policy and law is that you can't run in on innuendo or supposition, because that, in fact, would be perpetrating a terrorist act of your own. And finally, to further that, one could ask the question, or some could ask the question, what exactly in the past 10 years has Iraq done outside of their own borders to prompt you all going in?
Well,
and please be specific, regardless of what we can do there.
Let me say to you, there's no question that Iraq has been a diligent, extensive, thorough developer of weapons of mass destruction. Okay? Period. Nuclear before 91, chemical and bio, perhaps even as we speak on to today. That, in my mind, is sufficient reason to take, if it's prudently done, and all the provisos that I've said, military action. Letting a country acquire weapons of mass destruction in an unstable part of the world is, in my mind, very close to a casus belli.
What about India and Pakistan, then?
Very good question, but remember Mr. Lincoln's adage, I can only do so much at the same time. Remember North Korea. Remember North Korea. Yeah. There are all sorts of problems out there, but I just do not see that the basis for legal, legal, I'm an MIT guy, I'm not, legal I don't know. But in every other way, moral and so on, I believe there's a basis there for military action if you have some confidence that you're going to leave the world a better place.
Can you want to add a bit? Let me, unfortunately, it's my bad news to say that we've come to the...
Take her last question.
Oh,
she's been staying there.
Okay. Please, as a favor here, quickly, short question.
Thank you. You've talked a lot about the relationship or what action the United States should take against state actors like Iraq, especially. But we haven't addressed very much about the non-state actors. And It is clear to me, at least, that the strengthening of these non-state actors has a lot to do with the lack of legitimacy that much of U.S. foreign policy has had in the last decade. So how do you think the action against Iraq would affect this legitimacy? And what can the U.S. do to build more legitimacy? Because I have to say that as a Mexican student, I feel quite alienated by the way you have talked about all the power that the U.S. has. And I think that could be very negative.
Well, my view is that the issue of non-state actors is one that's going to be with us, that defeating Iraq, what it will do to the political legitimacy of the United States depends upon the way it's done. And as I've said 50 times here, if you don't pay attention to the politics in that region, you're going to be in trouble. But if it's done properly, I believe that it will reduce the risks, which remain unbelievably high, of terrorist action. But I believe it's the right way to do it.
Ken, are you afraid that what you would propose to do would have some impact on the legitimacy or the perceptions of legitimacy that would impact the numbers or incentives for non-state actors?
No, I think it would give the clear lesson that, as John said so nicely, that weapons of mass destruction in dastardly hands that are threatening civilization are not going to be tolerated. And I think not only does it give that lesson, but it's far more important than that lesson. It eliminates that source for weapons of mass destruction. Listen, if I were Al-Qaeda today, I would have, as I'm sure they do, agents in Baghdad just waiting for a handoff at some point so I can use the weapons of mass destruction. It's silly for Saddam Hussein to use it himself. It would be much smarter to have a kind of deniability and to spread it around by these guys who are all too happy to use those weapons of mass destruction. So it would be really kind of adding to the total war against the international terrorist network by stopping one of the primary sources that they could have for this war. And let me just finish by saying, are you calling it to the close? Yeah. I think that there's been a wonderful debate, John. And I think that the questions, let me just say, have been outstanding questions. And so I really, really did enjoy each one of them, and thought the caliber was extremely high. I guess my view of all this is that it is a situation of the most dire consequences. I think delay is extremely costly. I think that the 4 criteria that John has set up on deciding what leadership they're going to be in Iraq, I guess I'm totally against that. I think the Iraqi people should decide what leadership, as long as it's its territorial integrity on that. The consensus, I think that what we have found in international affairs is if the United States does the right thing, and does it to win, people join that consensus. It is interesting when you look back at the Gulf War, John, there's a lot of talk about coalition building. You know what didn't happen? There wasn't a lot of consultations about whether we were going to go in and roll back Saddam Hussein from conquering Kuwait and becoming the 2nd largest supplier of international oil in the world, and get his hands on nuclear weapons, et cetera, with all the resources of Kuwait. That was not part of the consensus building. The President of the United States says, we're going in there. This will not stand. This aggression against his neighbor is, talk about international law, the most 101 elementary international law. You can't gobble up your neighbor. That was rolled back totally properly by the United States, even after an international resolution at the UN Security Council, but it was totally legal before that because that is the basis of international law. And then the coalition was put into place after they knew the United States was going there. I think the United States creates these coalitions if people have a clear idea. We explain why it is, as Bush did last night, and it makes sense. By God, we are protecting ourselves. Point number 3, on the military support, John is absolutely right. We need to figure out exactly who does what in the military, but that's what the military does, and that's what the military does so nicely. They figure out the kind of resources, and they go and they do it. And I don't think, as I said many times, that it's going to be an awesome task to do this. Iraq is much weaker, we are much stronger, and we are playing for keeps. Lastly, economic assistance, civil assistance. I think the Iraqis will do just fine as a country. There's one big problem to the development of Iraq and the Iraqi people, and that is Saddam Hussein. And I think if the United States takes the action soon that I am advocating today, we will see consequences throughout the region. But more immediately, we will have the tremendous satisfaction that I felt after we got rid of the Taliban in Afghanistan, of people coming out on the street, playing their music, women and girls going to school for the first time in 10 years, a flowering and appreciation of what the United States did, not for ourselves, but for the people of Afghanistan. That will be in spades in Iraq. We will also find out to our utter horror that he was further along in the weapons of mass destruction than we ever had suspected. And there will be all kinds of revelations about biological weapons, chemical weapons, and nuclear weapons that'll fill up the front page of the Boston Globe and the New York Times so that people say, my God, all this was going on these reports. And it will have an effect throughout the region to know that that kind of threat to the West, to freedom, to tolerance, is not going to be tolerated anymore. It's a new ball game, and since September 11th, we're playing for keeps.
Good. Let me give John the final word.
Thank you all very much. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Let me, on behalf of David Pryor and the audience here, thank Ken Edelman and John Deutsch for a very lively debate. We haven't necessarily come to a unanimous conclusion, but we've come to the end today. This topic is going to be with us through the spring, obviously, so we'll come back to it and we'll hope to get both of them back.
That's
so
obvious.
thank you very much.
That was very well done. Gentlemen, thank you both. You just screwed up on the serious.
Yeah, right. I pounced. No, that didn't bother me. I knew I'd made that mistake.
I pounced. You're welcome. Okay, good.
It's terrific. And a lot of details, so please say hey.
Justin, how are you? I talked to Gerg, and I think you're okay.
Thanks a lot. Leadership